everybody, and thank you so much for coming to my presentation. As you might have seen in the daily bulletin or the title on the slideshow, my project is about improving accessibility in the auditorium, specifically wheelchair accessibility. And if we could move to the next slide. So there's I'm going to talk a little bit about why I started this project, because it's a bit of a long story, to be honest. My sophomore year, the drama department did the show Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. During Tech Week, one of our lead actresses got into a car accident and was hospitalized. Fortunately, she was able to perform her role, but she was in a wheelchair. It took almost 20 minutes to get her into the auditorium for the shows that weekend. That's 20 minutes to travel the distance of here to here. This was the first indicator for me that the auditorium had a serious problem. That same year, another girl in my grade was in a wheelchair for most of the spring semester. We were in an acting class together, so she needed to be able to access the auditorium in order to practice and prepare for our theater final. For those who don't know, finals for the theater classes usually mean practicing an excerpt from a show and then performing it instead of a written final. Due to her wheelchair, we were only able to practice on stage, as the ramps down into the auditorium had been removed after the winter musical finished. This was both limiting to her and to other groups in that class who also needed time to practice on the stage. Both these girls had a lot of trouble trying to get into the auditorium to do what they needed to do for school. To be honest, I recognized there was a problem with the way that things were, but I didn't really think there was much that I could do to change things. I was only a sophomore after all. So I kind of pushed the issue to the side. Then comes junior year, and I have to pick a topic to do my senior project on for Honors Academy. I debated over a couple of different ideas, but the problems with the accessibility of Concordia's auditorium kept sticking with me. Okay, next slide. The first stage of my project was to figure out how bad the situation in the auditorium was and to look at potential solutions. So during orientation at the beginning of this year, I asked Mr. Murphy, our director, to take me through the auditorium so he could point out areas that were causing issues, and I could ask questions about where he would suggest wheelchair seating and factors to consider when looking at seating. An example of a factor to consider is some of our shows use actors exiting through the back of the auditorium or walking through the aisles as part of the show. It's important to make sure that guests, actors, and students are all safe and enjoying their experience. So we don't want to have wheelchair seats that are in the aisles, because that's not enjoyable for people who are in wheelchairs, and it's also a safety risk in the case of an emergency. Mr. Murphy's insights were very helpful in determining what could be done and what would be unlikely to work in this particular situation due to the student traffic passing through different areas. At first, my project was to find and implement solutions for the accessibility issues in the Concordia Auditorium. However, this plan was derailed in a good way by the announcement of the building improvement plan. When the town hall meetings were announced, I realized that I needed to change my approach for my senior project. I went to one of the meetings and was lucky enough to have Mrs. Levitt as the moderator for my table. I got to sit with teachers and voice concerns that I had over accessibility and general issues with our building. After the meeting, I was able to meet with the architect who had mocked up the plan for the stages of development of new construction and voiced my concerns, and he let me know about what was being done to work on solutions and what didn't currently have a solution in mind. After going to the town hall meeting, the next stage of my plan was research. One of the requirements for Honors Academy projects is that seniors write a research paper or annotated bibliography related to the topic they are working on for their senior project. Since I was looking at making the school more accessible, specifically in the auditorium, I looked at how accessibility is being implemented in schools around the world, which is very intriguing. Considering even schools that were very wheelchair friendly, there were still a lot of issues concerning elevator space and making it to classes on time. After completing my independent research, I get to meet with the Zalmans, my mentors, first over video call and then in person. I got to hear their insights on the work that I had done so far and their suggestions based on personal experience. Both Dr. Zalman and Mrs. Zalman really helped me in understanding just how much difficulty wheelchair users face in daily life. They shared how simple things can lead to a lot of trouble, and it made me realize how much that I take for granted that I can access. Next slide. Okay. The first option for a wheelchair accessible entrance to the auditorium is the front entrance. The best part of this entrance is there is a ramp leading from the parking lot to the doors of the auditorium, but unfortunately, this ramp is not ADA compliant. For those who don't know, ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in everyday activities. ADA guidelines state that ramps at maximum can rise 1 inch over a length of 12 inches. So the ramp outside the auditorium is not compliant, is far too steep. In addition to the steep slope of the ramp outside the auditorium, the ramp is also curved, just slightly, but it is curved. In order to be ADA compliant, ramps cannot be curved or circular, they must be straight. Luckily, this issue is being addressed in the building improvement plan. Next slide. The plan is to build a student gallery covering the area where the entrance to the auditorium currently stands and construct an ADA compliant ramp outside the new entrance to the auditorium. There is a solution in the future, but for now it's better to have at least have a ramp into the auditorium rather than the stairs alone. Once you have entered the building, you're able to access the top level of the auditorium. People in wheelchairs are only able to get to the very top level as there are steps leading from the top of the auditorium to the middle section. Currently, the seats that are considered wheelchair accessible are the end seats before the first step, with little space for wheelchair accommodation, and those 12 seats in total that are just not, those are just end seats. In the building improvement plan, next slide, ADA accessible seats would be built where the sound booth currently is, moving the sound booth to the center of the auditorium. And if you can see, the green area is the auditorium, and you can see a little tiny piece of writing that says ADA seating, so that is where it would be implemented, moving where the sound booth is currently down. Next slide. This is currently where the sound booth is, where it's located at the top of the auditorium, and it covers a wide area space, so there would be a fair amount of seating provided if it was the sound booth area was moved down further into the auditorium. This platform would be easily accessible from both center doors of the auditorium, which you can't see, but the walkways on either side lead directly to a door, making this an ideal solution. When considering this, it's also important to consider who else will be sitting with someone in a wheelchair. Being in a wheelchair should not mean being isolated from those you came with. On this accessible platform, folding chairs of some kind should be set up so that seats can be configured to accommodate different sizes of groups. Okay, next. And then there's another on more about what is being done with the building improvement plan. And then next slide. Currently, the back door is how many students at Concordia are able to access the stage in the auditorium while mobility impaired. The advantage of this approach is that it allows more access to the auditorium as the lower area has ramps rather than having steps. However, this access is severely limited once the ramps leading off the stage are put away after a show. In addition to this problem, when the ramps connecting to the stage are out, they block the pathway of students trying to enter and exit through the aisles, leading to the ramp and surrounding area getting very crowded, especially during chapel when a lot of people are trying to exit in a very short amount of time. Next slide. There is a side door entrance to the auditorium that could be considered as another entrance. If you're looking from the top of the auditorium, it is the door on the lower right side. There's a picture of it from inside the auditorium, but outside the auditorium, you can see that this is not an ideal solution because there's very steep stairs to enter from outside. Currently, it's pretty filled with leaves, And it's honestly very hard to locate because it's in an alleyway on the side of the building. I only know it's known more by people who are in the fine arts and are passing through that area more regularly for band or choir. Next slide. One thing that both my mentors mentioned being helpful was clear signage indicating how and where wheelchair users could enter the building. Clear signage should include the contact information of someone who can help wheelchair users enter the building and an indication of whether entrance is wheelchair accessible. It's important to have contact information so that wheelchair users are able to contact this point person after an event ends and they need to leave or just trying to get into the building itself, because doors can't be left unlocked at all times for security reasons, but you shouldn't be stuck inside due to not being able to find someone to let you out. Posting signs near the entrances indicating how wheelchair users can enter would be incredibly helpful. Next slide. It's important to have people who can help. I mentioned earlier having someone who can respond to calls for assistance. In addition to this, when focusing on the auditorium, I looked at how shows could run smoother by assisting those with physical limitations. I asked Mrs. Habiger, the managing director of the theater department, about implementing the option to select wheelchair accessible tickets when selling tickets for our drama productions here at Concordia. She researched the service that we used to sell the tickets and was able to find a way to list wheelchair accessible seating. Having this information will give Mr. Murphy time to designate ushers to help those in wheelchairs, opening doors so that they can exit in time and before the crowds go through, and setting up seats so that they have seats for the group they have arrived with. And having a student usher do these things could be incredibly helpful and could require minimal information for the student usher, but a lot of help could be provided through that. Next slide. A big issue with the auditorium is that the lobby restrooms for the women are not accessible for a standard wheelchair due to the wall in front of the entrance. For those who, as I mentioned earlier, the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, has a lot of standards on compliance. And one of those things is that all door entrances must be 32 inches wide. And this is the case with almost all the doors, I measured at Concordia. However, when taking this width into account, there's not enough area to rotate anything in that size because there is just enough room to pass through, but not enough room to rotate, which is just not a good option to just not be able to use the restroom. That's a basic human right. However, this will be resolved with the construction of new, larger, and accessible auditoriums on the other side of the auditorium lobby with the improvement plan. Next slide. Throughout the research of this project, we'll mainly focus on the auditorium and the affected areas surrounding it. I found some other issues that needed to be addressed. The lower level gym is completely inaccessible. When talking with Dr. Zalman about his experiences as a wheelchair user, he talked about coming to see his son Jack's basketball game. He purchased a ticket and went to watch the game, only to find out it was in the lower gym, which he could not get to. This issue that he had to deal with relates back to what I was talking about earlier, with providing assistance for wheelchair users. Someone should have let Dr. Zalman know that he would be unable to watch the game instead of having him buy a ticket for a game he could not see. This issue is being addressed in the improvement plan with getting rid of the lower level gym essentially. But these issues with the lower level gym should serve as a reminder to consider accessibility in the construction of the new auxiliary gym. If games are going to be in the gym, then there should be seatings for wheelchair users that are not directly on the sidelines, not blocking aisleways, and not isolated from others, because just being in a wheelchair shouldn't mean that you lose the ability to have this community with others. Another issue that I found when researching this project is how students with mobility impairments have to cross the road in order to get to classes in the music wing, GRTC wing, or the gym. The girl I talked about earlier when talking about the inspiration behind my project, who was in a wheelchair for most of her spring semester, was also in my JRTC class. While she was in the wheelchair, she missed about half of her classes for JRTC because she was unable to get to the other building. People at the door to the music wing or the JRTC wing are not visible from any of the classrooms except to those in the hallways, leading to people getting stuck outside. Many people open doors to help their classmates, but students with physical limitations should not have to bear the weight of making sure that someone can let them in the building for their classes. In addition to not being able to get into the building, having to cross the road in order to get to classes leads to issues in cases of extreme weather conditions. Snow and ice are not ideal to navigate, and students would not be dressed for the cold due to dress code regulations, so they should not be out in this extreme weather without proper gear and being able to make sure that they are safe. This issue is being addressed in the improvement plan, as classrooms will be built in the area that the road passing through our two buildings are currently. For the time that it takes to get this construction completed, there should be ways for students to get to classes easily when crossing the road. Either with teachers making sure to let in students who need to cross, or allowing students with physical limitations to have key fobs to let themselves into areas, as a few different suggestions. Restrictions in accessibility are currently hindering learning, and restrictions in mobility should not hinder learning. Another small thing causing a large issue at Concordia is a small staircase. A staircase with 8 steps separates the lobby of the auditorium from the main level of the rest of the building for wheelchair users. To be able to get to the cage, people in wheelchairs would have to exit out of the front auditorium entrance and re-enter the school through the main entrance. Another set of stairs in the hallway leading from the back entrance to the auditorium doors prevent wheelchair access to the lower level of the auditorium, except when we have those ramps out for shows, as mentioned earlier. These stairs need to be addressed when looking at the improvement plan, and when I talked with Mr. Pennekamp about what is being done, he talked about how that is one of the things they're planning to look at fixing in the updated version of the improvement plan. Next slide. Thank you all for coming to my presentation, and I hope that I have conveyed to you how important accessibility is to implement in our school. Thank you to Dr. and Mrs. Zalman, who have helped me so much in considering different solutions to these problems. Thank you for how you have opened my eyes to see how accessibility issues affect wheelchair users. Thank you to Mr. Murphy and Mrs. Habegger, who have helped me look at how this project will affect the theater department and have offered their insight from years with the drama department. Thank you to Mrs. Levitt and Mr. Pennekamp, who both took the time to talk with me about these issues and address the concerns that I raised, giving valuable insight on how administration is looking at these accessibility issues. And thank you to Mrs. Erdis, my Honors Academy advisor for these past 4 years. Thank you for constantly pushing and encouraging me. Next slide. This project has done so much to help me see accessibility issues in my daily life, and I hope that my research will help to bring awareness and keep accessibility at the forefront of improvements to Concordia. Thank you.
Time for questions. If anyone has any questions for Lizzie, please ask away.
Yes.
Are there accessible women's bathrooms other places that someone could get to?
Currently, there is not really accessible restrooms on the main level and open to visitor areas of the school. There are accessible restrooms on the 3rd and 1st floor, but those are in the academic wing, which is locked during games and different events outside of school hours. So the restrooms outside the cage currently have a hallway inside the bathroom that has no room to rotate a wheelchair, which is a major issue. You should not have to be able to go into the academic wing to find these things. But when I talked with Mr. Pennekamp, again, he said that they are looking at reconfiguring these restrooms to be addressing these concerns, because a lot of the issues that come with implementing accessibility at Concordia is that the building was not made with these requirements in mind, and it's very hard to fulfill these requirements when just working off the standard thing, because ADA requirements are very strict on what has to be exactly like that, which is good because we want to make sure that everything is uniform, that everyone can access everything, but it's very hard in trying to update to make sure that everything is accessible for everyone. Okay. Any others? Ms. Curtis?
Lizzie, something I started to think about through your talk is, did anything come into your mind about just furniture and how furniture affects those that would be in wheelchairs, and did that come up in research or thought at all? I know you're just in an auditorium, but in terms of a classroom, is anything like that cross your mind?
I think one of the things I kind of address and is with like the platform on the top of it is that everything, these things, something to be wheelchair accessible, there needs to be like movable furniture. So having chairs that can be easily moved around by a single person to prevent to create a space for a wheelchair user to sit is very important. One of the places I feel like this could be modeled of is in the main campus at Blackhawk Christian High School. They have a wheelchair seating area that's just a raised area that has coffee tables and chairs to sit, but there's this area that is just open but has seating, but it's just not in strict rows to make sure that there's a lot of space for differing numbers of wheelchair users. Yes?
In the discussions with the architect, did you find that you were able to offer them some suggestions, or were they already pretty far down the line in terms of trying to fulfill the requirements of ADA?
When I talked with the architect, these plans that have been mocked up were very basic plans looking at what's the bare minimum of what needs to be done to keep this building current and updated with staying like low cost, to just make sure that Concordia is updating what needs to be updated for it to stay functional. However, when presenting these, he acknowledged that a lot of these issues were not fixed. Like the stairs leading into from the auditorium to the cage had not been addressed. So he had solutions for some of these issues, but acknowledged that more work needed to be done to make sure that the auditorium was completely wheelchair accessible. Okay.
Hi, I'm Dr. Zolman. Or Mark, and was able to kind of help mentor Lizzie, and I'm just impressed with her sensitivity, seeing an issue that a lot of people don't see, and then working to try to find ways to solve it. And she's inspiring. She is really, especially the woman. So we were very blessed and encouraged we were able to help in this project.
Thank you. It was an honor to work with you both. If no one has any other questions, I believe that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening.